right, here we go. Let's go. This room is so radiant for you.
Thank you.
Reggie, you're all the way that way. Josh, you take. Hey, Sterling. Thanks so much, brother.
Thanks for having
So
me.
happy that you're here. Thanks, Chadwick.
Hi,
So
how
lovely.
Are you?
And now you have your new hair.
I do.
Well, this crowd is very much ready for you. Reggie,
Thanks for coming.
Reggie, I was just telling them, reminding you would have loved sitting in the theater. Every moment, every beat, every expression, every moment of laughter, every gesture, the audience really responded. And I assume that this is a classic folk smart audience. You're going to get this nationally.
I love New York City. Thank you.
I also told the audience that this is the largest folks film series audience we've ever had. And the second one who took second place, that you've just surpassed, was when we had Kristen Stewart here, right? So I just told the audience, they've heard this, that you could tomorrow say that Marshall defeats Twilight.
Such an odd movie to show at NYU Law.
Yeah.
You guys don't feel it.
All right, he's very, like the lawyer, like the real estate lawyer, like the personal injury lawyer that he is, he's right. We didn't have Kristen Stewart for Twilight. We had her for a movie that nobody saw. We had her with a film called Camp X-Ray, which was a wonderful film. But
I love Camp
X-Ray. All right, so Reggie, let's start with you. You're a distinguished black filmmaker. You could have made a film about all sorts of African Americans who've affected American history. And as a matter of fact, you could have made a film about Frederick Douglass, who I understand is still alive and doing an excellent job. The President of the United States said that Frederick Douglass is still alive, doing an excellent job. You could have made a movie about him, and had you made a movie about him, he would have been here tonight. I don't think the President actually knows what job Frederick Douglass had. I think he thinks he's a second baseman for the Cubs. Why Marshall, and not just why Marshall, but why Marshall at this period of his life, not the one that we normally see him arguing Board versus Brown versus Board of Education, sitting on the Supreme Court. Why this one? And by the way, you made a thriller. You didn't think you could do that out of a Supreme Court justice's life.
Well, you sort of answered the question. I mean, most people go, oh, Brown versus Board of Education, I learned that in 5th grade. I'll catch it on cable. This is a case you don't know about. You don't know the outcome. You don't know if this man is innocent or guilty. Whether he is innocent or guilty, we don't know what the jury's going to say. So we now have the grounds for a courtroom thriller instead of what I call a medicine movie. You know, oh, you need to see that. Oh, you're going to learn a lot. Oh, just take your medicine. Right. That's a terrible sales pitch for a movie. I wanted to make a date movie.
Camp X-Ray.
And there's no topic. And why Thurgood? I mean, I think if there was a 5th person on Mount Rushmore, it would be Thurgood Marshall. I mean, you know, you've got the founders who created this amazing document, the Constitution. And because our government was flawed from the beginning, right? All men are created equal, but, I mean, look, why do we have an electoral college? To appease the slave voting states. So more than any American, Thurgood Marshall did the most to take the promise of the American experiment and bring it into reality.
All right. Chadwick, you play Marshall, and you've already played Jackie Robinson, and you've played James Brown. Speaking of Mount Rushmore, by the way, speaking as a white guy, we would be very happy for you to play a famous white person. I would love to see you as...
What do you want me to play?
Billy Joel.
All right, my agent is here.
Tom Brady.
Listen.
I'm just saying, I would be okay with that. But what you did here is enormously interesting. You turned a Supreme Court justice into Indiana Jones. You gave him a kind of a swaggering, swashbuckling, crusading feel. There's a lot of humor to this guy. Mm-hmm. He's cool. He's virile. He's hanging out at Minton's in Harlem. He's got his Mac Daddy going. By the way, you probably want to wonder why a white guy knows what Mac Daddy means. You want to know why? I learned it from Reggie.
Oh,
you know from where? Boomerang. If you've ever seen, there's a really great, have you ever seen Boomerang? It's an earlier Reggie Hudlin film. Eddie Murphy has a great line when he says something like, I got my great Mac Daddy going, right? So that's, and I looked that up. I never heard that. In this case, I'm just curious, Chadwick, I'm not going to ask you who you like to play more, James Brown, Jackie Robinson, Thurgood Marshall, but I am curious to know, as an African American, which story you think is most important, or do you think they're all equally important? Because they are Mount Rushmore figures.
Let me address the swagger that you spoke of first. So, you know, I thought that's who Thurgood Marshall was. You know, to me, to embody his character meant, you know, what time period is he coming from? You know, because for me, you know, I know I don't look like him, you know, and yet here I was being asked to play it, feeling like I should play it, and I had to make him come out of me. I had to find the essence of the man, pour him into my body, and not have the wig, not have the fake mustache, not change my complexion, and let my hair, the straightening or the combing my hair back, finding my own mustache, keeping my complexion, and finding the cool within me that was similar to him. See, I feel like if you're the lone guy for the NAACP running around, taking these cases in dangerous places, and yet you live basically during the Harlem Renaissance, and your friends are Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, you're in the it place to be, yet you have this selflessness to leave that and go to these dangerous places to fight for justice. It takes a certain amount of arrogance to do that. It takes a certain amount of confidence in order to do that. And it takes, a sense of humor and bringing that cool into the room and making people want to work with you in order to do that. So that's, to me, exactly what he was. He could go into a room with alpha personalities and minds and have those attorneys argue a case to get to the point that would win at the Supreme Court. He was willing to walk into a courtroom in the South where he knew he was going to lose and stand there as if he won so he could go to a higher level and then a higher level and a higher level and ultimately win in the Supreme Court. And he was 29 out of 32. So what is that confidence? And so to me, that swagger is exactly what it took to do what he did.
Do we know? Naturally, all films take artistic liberties, and we expect some of that, as it should. Do we know whether Thurgood Marshall kicks ass in a bar? Do we know that he has guns pointed at him in the Deep South?
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't seem to flinch.
Oh, yeah.
He seems to be cool.
Oh, yeah, we definitely, there are stories of him, ending up in the back of the car in Columbia, Tennessee, and Z. Alexander Luby actually follows the police and gets him out of the car before he gets lynched. He was in constant danger.
So unlike Langston Hughes, he really does put his life on the line.
Oh, yeah.
It's that joke about Langston Hughes at Minton's when he says, you only wrote about people fighting fascism. In this case, what you're saying is, here's the real swagger.
Right, and he was known, even as a kid growing up in Baltimore, I think Baltimore was sort of, the best training ground for him because although it has like a great diversity. You know, he worked in a hat shop, in a Jewish hat shop. And he was around all different types of people. His mom was a very strong woman. And so he basically had this place where he was not afraid to be around people that didn't look like him. And at the same time, he wasn't afraid to fight them. His dad told him, if anybody ever calls you nigga, then you fight them. That's a real story. He was known as the Joe Louis of the courtroom. So seeing him fight in that bar is exactly, again, who he was.
Sterling, first of all, congratulations on your Emmy win.
Thank you.
And let me say, that was one of the great acceptance speeches, in addition to the performances. Just really sincere and heartfelt. And just to say, I'm also an Andre Braugher fan and was a Homicide, Life on the Street fan, and I totally was with you that whole thing. And I thought the idea that you were acknowledging a piece of history and performances and actors and even someone who you've looked up to and went to Stanford with was just incredibly generous of you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So when I think of your character, I think of To Kill a Mockingbird. In fact, when I think of the movie, the way it's structured, your character, the chauffeur, is really very much
Tom Robinson.
Tom Robinson, dignified, chivalrous.
Jay Spell?
Yeah.
Jay Spell wasn't the most dignified cat. Like Tom Robinson was probably an infinitely better human being than Joseph Spell, but neither one of them were guilty of the crime that they were accused of.
Right.
You know?
But what I mean by dignified here in particular is that, again, Reggie's film upends stereotypes, right? The whole idea, as we've seen in the Deep South and even in a blue state like Connecticut, black men go after white women, right? That's the stereotype. That's what we hear, right? But the dignity here, as what we see with Tom Robinson, is that Spell feels bad for the white woman.
Yeah.
Right? He wants to rescue the white woman from who? Her white husband.
Right.
Just like Tom Robinson, to some degree, is looking to rescue or feels bad. That one of the things, the reason he gets convicted is he says in open court, I felt bad for Myola Ewell.
Sure.
Right? And that's one of the things that convicts him. Like, why would a black man ever feel bad for a white woman?
Right.
And what I loved about this film is that there's an enormous amount of dignity and sensitivity here to the character that is playing the chivalrous part, to say, I want to save you, I care about you, and I want to, and I wonder whether this to you, to some degree, is part of what you were thinking in doing your performance.
I do think at the end of the film, it's an interesting thing because Joseph Spell's caught between a rock and a hard place. He knows that it is a dangerous thing that he's entered into, whether it's consensual or not consensual, because in the eyes of white America at that time, it was a no-no, right? So do I confess to actually having this relationship and risk whatever the public has to bring my way, or do I admit to doing something that I didn't do and be imprisoned? And it takes Thurgood Marshall to convince him that his freedom is something worth fighting for, right? Like, even if you have to face the perils of what the public brings your way, at least you get to do them on your own terms as a free man. But what I do love, as you said, like at the end of the movie, once he is found innocent, not guilty, he sees Eleanor Strubing and recognizes that she's in a prison of her own. And she has to go back to this marriage where she is a battered woman, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And he does, as Atticus Finch says, has the unmitigated temerity to have pity for a white woman, you know? Like, it is a very, I do like that he is given that moment to recognize that we're both human. And while we're both like in very different circumstances, we both deserve to be free.
And just to get the that's a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Hey, no problem.
And just to get the context for those people who remember To Kill a Mockingbird, this essentially takes place only 8 or 9 years later.
Yeah.
Or actually 6 or 7 years later. To Kill a Mockingbird, I think, is between 33 and 35. This is 1941.
Right.
And so it gives you a sense that even in a blue state in Connecticut, you still have the exact same situation.
Sure.
And Kate's character as Eleanor, that's a tough part, right? Because can we have sympathy for her? there is no way she can explain this in polite the society of Connecticut. There's nothing she can do, and yet she's allowing a black man to take the fall, and to some other degree that she's a victim also, right? That this is not just about the African-American experience. To some degree, you have to introduce the idea of battered women and spousal assault.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, she made a choice that was wrong, right? So, but by making that choice, she found herself in this situation she couldn't extricate herself from in any way. And what's intriguing about playing a character like that, even though it's hard to connect to personally, is believing that, and then watching for us, with Reggie and I. And
I have a question.
yeah.
The wrong decision, is it knocking boots or lying about knocking boots? What are you referring to specifically? No, seriously, I mean that.
Say that again. Is it?
The wrong decision, was it entering into the relationship or was it the lie about the relationship?
From what I was playing?
Yeah.
It was the guilt of the actual act.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
So it was like you find yourself in that situation and the guilt is so overwhelming and it's so terrifying. And if, God forbid, he finds out, I could die. Mm-hmm. That was where it came
And
from.
could never exist in polite company in that world. She could never exist. Again, it's the exact opposite of Mayola Ewell, and yet it's the same thing, which shows you how awful race has been in this country from its inceptions, because there was no escape even in a blue state, even with a rich white woman. In To Kill a Mockingbird, it's the poor, right? There's no real escape in that instance. I was also wondering, Kate, if you felt your character is competing also with the overshadowing of racism in introducing the idea of spousal assault. That this is something else that's happening in this movie.
No, I think that it would be a much more challenging choice for me to have played this character if it wasn't a true story. I think that because this is an actual case and because we stayed so true to what actually happened, it was just, history wrote the story for us, right? So for me, it was just the idea that this actually happened, and to be a part of playing in a film that I think is so important for us to be talking about, and to be able to sit here on the stage and have conversations like this. And we still need to be having these conversations, and I just wanted to be a part of that, and so because it was true, I tried not to. If I read too much into it personally, it would have been hard for me to do the movie. I think Reggie and I really talked about that. It was a challenging thing for me, so I really just wanted to stay true to the story and true to what Reggie wanted for the story.
May I say real quick that I find Eleanor Strubing fascinating, and I didn't think when I watched and read the movie that the idea of spousal abuse could possibly overshadow some of the other larger themes of the film, but what it helped for me to illuminate was just the accessibility and readiness to execute white privilege, right? Like recognizing that if all else fails, I can still pull this card out, and maybe this is my get out of jail free card. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, sorry to invoke the To Kill a Mockingbird, in both instances, railroading a black man. How awful both stories, both black men who showed me kindness.
Right.
And yet they showed me kindness, and yet in this country, this is what I should do. This is what I'm expected to do. I'm going to get to Josh in a minute, but Reggie, I was thinking of something that Kate said. You must have gone through a number of Thurgood Marshall cases. Did you have to compete, the Spell case, compete with Strubing's case, compete with other cases that you thought maybe I should make it about this? Was there a second place?
That's not the process of the film. It was very unusual sort of coincidences where our writer, Michael Koskoff, is a Connecticut-based attorney. And almost all of his kids work in show business. So he said, I'm going to write a script. And he knew about this case when Thurgood came to Connecticut and worked with a local attorney.
I see.
So he had researched the case, and when he finished it, he sent it to the daughter of Sam Friedman to get her kind of sign off. And she says, oh, this is wonderful. You know, my college roommate's a Hollywood producer. I'm going to send it to her. So Paula Wagner gets a call from her college roommate and goes, someone wrote a script about my dad. It's great. Now, the possibility of that being true is almost zero. But it's your college roommate, you're going to read it. She reads it and goes, oh my God, this is a very good movie. And it was sent to me, and when I read it, I loved it because it avoided the obvious. And I just thought, well, this is a real life superhero origin story, where it has so much information about Thurgood. We could extrapolate where he's going to be, but there's all these things we don't know about the man. But more importantly, as a piece of genre filmmaking, it's a legal thriller. It's a Western. It's a buddy movie. It's a very compelling story if it didn't have Thurgood Marshall in it. And for all those reasons, I thought this is the way to tell the story.
Well, speaking of buddy movie, Josh.
Way to take your damn time. Falling asleep over here.
You know,
Now the good part.
he doesn't want to admit the graciousness that I showed here, because we're both from South Florida. So I thought he'd be cool about waiting. So Josh, speaking of the buddy film piece, first of all, you should tell the audience about your own brother.
My brother went to NYU Law. Yeah?
He's a tax lawyer.
He's a tax attorney. That's the hard part.
He doesn't do civil rights
This
work.
story does not have a happy ending.
And you didn't call up your tax brother lawyer and ask him for advice.
No, I actually, I went to see a couple of trials. Having a lawyer write the script, it was incredible access to have a firsthand experience to get in those courtrooms. I was sitting at the first trial he took me to was a murder case involving a serial killer in Los Angeles. And I'm like, what the fuck? This is how things work. Like, is this every case in LA? I want to be a lawyer.
So this is an interesting part. I joked with the audience. I said, Reggie upends so many stereotypes here. This is the Jewish lawyer has no idea what's going on, right? And that it's a tougher spot to play, right? You're learning through this buddy film, right? But there's a powerful theme here, and I'm sure Reggie was part of this thinking, which was that there is a long-standing history of Black-Jewish alliance in both the participation and the solidarity of the civil rights movement. Long-standing history, which I, speaking as someone who cares about this, have always lamented has been forgotten. And it's a righteous history. Martin Luther King and Rabbi Heschel linking arms in arms in Selma. And this film is a reminder of that. It's a homage to that. The very fact that Sam Friedman, after he gets schooled by Thurgood Marshall, becomes a civil rights lawyer and spends 35 years doing this kind of work. And I wonder whether this was part of your own thinking in doing this, that this is a buddy film, but it's a special buddy film because it has a true history. And also the Holocaust is in the background. It's all over this film. So, there's a scene in the synagogue where, you think, well, Jews don't get it. They don't want to participate in this civil rights story. But then we see that they do, right? That somebody hands them money to help him, says your father would be proud. The wife kisses him. And we know throughout history that, in fact, that was an alliance. And I'm wondering whether you can speak to that, speaking as a Jewish American.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm Irish Catholic.
Yeah, they believe this, Josh.
Kate is laughing so hard right now.
Oh, no.
Really,
they
I
all
can't
know
pass
that.
off at all.
Yeah, they believe you, Josh.
No, you're right. The movie, in many ways, that alliance that they have is so much at the center of what this is. Look, my grandparents were both in the Holocaust. The proximity to the events that happen in this film prior to America engaging in World War II is something that's frustrating in many ways, just because, you know, being on the other side of it and hearing the horror stories about my grandfather being in Auschwitz, my grandmother being in the camps, it was haunting. And playing somebody who's sort of watching how he fits into the system, not engaging necessarily because he doesn't want to bring a spotlight onto himself. I get all that. I get all that. It's scary. It is scary, especially at a time when people are being persecuted not only because of the color of their skin, but because of their faith. So that, to me, had a very personal element that I could not only relate to, but that I felt was important. In terms of that alliance, this is something that you're absolutely right. It's not only an alliance that happened in 1941, it's an alliance that's happening in 2017. And it's an important alliance. There's, nobody is spared from hatred. They're not picking favorites in Charlottesville, you know? They're looking at everybody who's different and not pure white. And that is, at the core, something that I don't think any of us could have foreseen when we made this film, because we made this movie over a year ago. Things were very different. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, things were very different. Hate is out in the open again in a really dark way. And to me, having a movie like this that isn't pedantic, that isn't medicine, that I hope gives you hope, that gives you a sense of, damn it, I'm an individual, but I can make a difference, that's empowering. And that guy giving my character the power to do more, to fight harder, I hope that the next Thurgood Marshall and Sam Friedman are in the audience. I hope that everybody takes that message and says, you know what, time to roll up my sleeves. Maybe I'm not gonna be the single lawyer fighting for the NAACP, but I can do my part. I can do better. I'm trying to do better as a voice in my community. We can all do better. So that, all of those elements are what made this so appealing and what continues to make me so proud of being a part of it.
Well done, guys.
While you were speaking about, you know, no one is spared, I was thinking about this wonderful moment in the movie, the scene, you have the parallel scenes of the bar and the outside the YMCA. The Jewish lawyer gets beat up, and Thurgood Marshall, yet again, has to defend himself against rednecks, this time in Connecticut. And so, as if to say, these are parallel stories. And Sam Friedman is sort of getting the concept fast. He's learning a lot. He's really starting to feel it. And then soon thereafter, he hears about cousins that are not going to make it anywhere out of Poland. And so that was wonderfully done without a lot of, again, with a lot of texture, and it was not pedantic. You didn't have to pound anyone over the head, Reggie. It's very well done. Everyone sees that movie, he says, I get it. The people who hate, they hate, right? They're not picking favorites, and they're just haters. And that we can see this, and they both learned this as if Thurgood Marshall knew this. And what I love about Chadwick's performance is as if he's foreshadowing. He sees this in Sam. He sees that, you know, you should be in this game more. You know, I'm going to school you, but you're the right guy. Because you're Jewish, you should be part of this story. I wonder, Reggie, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is a lot of people, when they see the film, they're like, right, that was all happening at the same time. They don't do the math that here we are on the verge of World War II, which is a war over white supremacy. I mean, very explicitly. We are so we're fighting that. At the same time, we are hypocritically practicing it at home. And just doing that simple math of going, hey, this is all happening at the same time. We are proud of fighting fascism and racism overseas. At the same time, it conveniently works for us in our, as part of our everyday lives. So I love that we get it. I love that we get it without hammering people about it. And, this is where allies come from. You go, look, here is a truth that we both have to face. We don't have to come from the same place. We don't have to agree on everything. But here's the thing we can agree on. And if we both have a dedication to truth, truth can be a weapon.
I wonder. Josh said, I was going to ask you this, but Josh sort of answered the question. So this was being filmed a year ago. We're now living in a year of a lot of renewed racial tensions. And even over past a year ago, we've had police shootings of African Americans in cities. Charlottesville is recent, but we've had police shootings and we've had rioting. We've had the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. I wonder whether you all called each other up as the movie was in production, post-production, and said, my God, we're making this incredible film that's true to the moment in time. It's probably rare as filmmakers to actually say that. You're always going to be late or early. But to be right on time with Charlottesville and what's happening with Black Lives Matter and the police shootings, I wonder whether, it's rare for actors to be able to be in this position. I mean, in a way, you're not just acting. You're becoming educators here. You're calling attention to other values that people have forgotten. You're giving the news a cultural imprint. And as we know, as artists, people learn information through a different portal of knowledge through art than they do from books or journalism. You learn something that's truer. Did you think that, this was oddly destiny for you?
I think our set, while we were making the film, was very politicized. We had a lot of fun on set, but we were also watching a lot of things happen. Dan Stevens was with us. He's British, and so we were watching Brexit. We were obviously keeping up with Ferguson and keeping up with the campaign, the reality that Trump was a legitimate candidate, and that Hillary's stock was descending. All of those things we were sort of watching. You come in one day, you see a police brutality incident, and you're talking about it before you do the scenes for that day. I think for the most part, the producers wanted this film to be shown at President Obama's White House. I think that was the target. They can correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't work that way. It was, I think it would have been rushed had they tried to put the film out during last year. So it would have it that now we're sitting with this film at this particular time, and it's, I don't believe there are any coincidences, but it was not planned that all of the events you described. And it's been so many things. It's like only half a year, it's crazy. And none of us could have foreseen that we would be in this moment. And I see Josh on social media talking about things. Yeah, we've texted each other. During that time period.
We get these emails from Josh.
Yeah,
He's very active.
And
always saying, we're having this meeting, you have to be there. We're gonna post.
We've all had our moments where we, I think, have been asked certain questions and we've spoken out or did certain things because of what's going on. And so I think, this movie, to a certain degree, after you do it, it also puts you in a position where you become, you become part of it. You become part of a movement of certain things because it has lit a fire up under you. And so, yeah, I definitely hope people watch this movie and they can pull some things out of it that will help them during this time.
Sterling, do you have anything? I mean, I'm struck by this story about how this was all happening simultaneously, and that this is such in many ways, a rare privilege to be able to tell this kind of story at this particular time in history.
Yeah, I think over the next 4 years, something that has been sort of illuminated for me, who I will say I'm not a highly political person, but the ability to play the role of Switzerland no longer really exists. Like, you kind of have to take a stance. And when you're faced with, and this time with this presidency that has sort of given voice to hatred and co-signed it and sort of normalized it as if it was okay. You know, thankful is not exactly the word, but at least I know where I stand. Like, at least I can see it now, and now I know how to deal. Like, if this is who you are, I know how I need to deal with you. And so our film, and I think films over this next time that help to address, like, you can't just be a citizen and not have a point of view. You know, I think our film has a definite point of view that points to the history of racism in this country, that it's not just African American history, it's American history. And if you don't know it, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's what's happening. You tend to think that the forward momentum of society is forward, but we go like a loop. You know, sometimes we go forward and sometimes we go back. And right now, we going back. But hopefully through art, the power of a story well told cannot be underestimated. That'll help us push forward once again.
Thank you. Has President Trump seen the movie? Will we offer to show it? Will we offer to show it at the White House? You could say it's about Frederick Douglass.
He hasn't returned any of my emails. It's really hurtful.
I wonder. This movie, and this will be our last question. This movie is very much a throwback to an era of the crusading lawyer who can change lives, change minds through the legal system. We now, and in a way, there's no accident in the title card at the end where Martin Luther King's name is invoked, because Marshall and Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass are the same line, right, as opposed to Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey. And you could maybe argue it's really Black Lives Matter and Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X. It's a different. You might. I just don't know. I just want to have this discussion. I think it's an important last question. I'm not criticizing Black Lives Matter. I want to know. I want to hear whether we think that this film is speaking to an idea that it's within the system that change is made, as opposed to thinking that if we think that, well, Marshall believed that these courtroom decisions incrementally changed lives, minds, the legal system, legislators, and that this is how we got civil rights legislation 20-some-odd years after this case. I'm not sure that African Americans, I'm not sure that they believe this anymore.
I just want to point out, you can take it after this, that Thurgood Marshall didn't agree with Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. I do believe he believed in the law and he believed in the system, but he was not a believer in nonviolence. And so in some ways, you could say that he had pieces of both of them. So I wouldn't align him outside of Garvey and outside of Malcolm X, because, as I said, if a white man calls you nigga, then his dad told him, to fight. Yeah, exactly.
And that's not what Martin Luther King's father would have said.
No, that's what Malcolm X would have said.
Right.
So You can go ahead and take it after that.